This program is brought to you in part by SalCal Real Estate Connections. Yes, welcome back to the Telescope View as we cover the UFO events dating back to Roswell. And today's show is going to be kind of interesting. We're going to cover some of the benefits that happened from Roswell, known as the Roswell Legacy. And believe me, there is plenty to talk about when it comes to what the benefits were from this event. Tell me, Rick, just to start touching on some of the few events that happened and what we got out of Roswell, what happened when it comes to reverse engineering?
Well, there's a lot of people who believe we got a fair amount of technology out of what happened at Roswell, the crash. They described, at the time of the crash, they described things that looked to them like filaments, and what people today would describe as filament fishing line. Mm-hmm. I remember back then we didn't use that. It was a cord type of a fishing line. Well, Jesse Marcel Jr. said he saw this filament, which he would describe as fishing line. What is that today? That's fiber optics.
Yes.
They talked about the crystal spheres, which they believe were a form of data storage, a data storage system. They talked about possibility of processors, computer processing chip type of technology. They talked about a number of different things, aircraft design, and some people believe that we actually got some of what we have today from Roswell. And in fact, there was a number of people who talked about that, and you're going to mention a couple of people like Kelly Johnson, Ben Rich. And there's also a man by the name of Lieutenant Philip Corso who wrote a book called The Day After Roswell, which some people liked, some people did not. It was on the New York bestseller list, but he said that his job was to farm out the stuff that they found at Roswell to different groups, public, private, to help them reverse engineer and create new products. And the thing was that the people who were getting some of this didn't even know where it was coming from, according to him, and where he or what they expected of them, other than to try and figure out how to work with it. And again, Corso, very high-placed military officer, Joint Chiefs, a national security advisor. He was involved in all of that. A tremendous military record. So a man with a great deal of credibility. So you'd have to ask, why would he say something like this and tarnish a reputation and subject his family to some of this if this wasn't all true? So we can talk a little bit about that.
There's probably people that were involved in this that also just did, like you said, disappear. People that may have known a lot of information that, for whatever reason, out of the country or whatever. There's a lot of this stuff is probably really just the tip of the iceberg, and we'll probably even find out more as the years roll on from here.
I mean, and a lot of this did go on. I mean, people don't want to believe it went on. It did go on to a certain extent. It's none of our business.
Well, one thing too, we really didn't cover this, Rick. I want you to explain, when we use that term, reverse engineering, what are we talking about? Getting an object we never seen before and start measuring it and doing all kinds of tests? What are we talking about?
Well, when we talk about reverse engineering, it's that we find something, we take it apart, and we figure out how it was built and put it back together. Who does this? Chinese do this all the time. They try and get a piece of our aircraft. Do you remember in the war in Eastern Europe when we lost the first stealth fighter, the F-117? They actually got lucky. That somehow got to China.
Yep.
Okay, the pieces got to China. They reversed engineered that. They took it apart. They looked at how it was put together. They only had the nose of it. The rest of it, or they only had the back of it. They didn't have the nose. They had to kind of fabricate some of it. But they looked at how it was put together. Now, they didn't have the technology to do all of it, and they didn't have the science on some of it. They probably do now because they have their own stealth fighter. Of course, they did steal it from a laptop, the F-35 information. But we take it apart, we learn how it was put together, and we try and duplicate it. Now, the interesting thing about some of the stuff, including Roswell, is the stories go, and I've talked to engineers who said that, oh yeah, we heard all about this, but we did not understand the propulsion systems. We could not replicate the propulsion systems, and we're still learning how to do that, but we're getting closer and closer, and some people suggest there's even a craft today that is basically an anti-gravity type of craft that does fly. And that's what we learned partly from Roswell. But we can talk more about what Corso found.
We will. And, I mean, this semiconductor wire, what you call it there?
The processors,
No.
the fiber optics.
I mean, that was a major breakthrough when you think about technology. Where did that come from?
Well, you know, and you got to remember that fiber optics don't exist without lasers. Now, although lasers has been, Einstein had that theory for many, many years, we had to start developing lasers really to kind of use the fiber optics. Yes, we can shine lights down them. But when you start to transmit information, you're going to be using laser light to move that data. So that's all stuff we had to come up with. So we knew something that lasers existed, but now we have this piece of material. What can we do with it? And that was a question too. So you have this filament, let's say, and we're looking at it and saying, what do we do with it? All right, what is it for? And then you have to even go back as far as that and say, okay, this is what we're going to do about it. And if you understand the development of microprocessors, and there's probably quite a few people out there that understand how we develop microprocessors and how they're built today, and how they're layered, and we use the silicon, and when we do that. But early on, they were built of little tiny switches. I mean, the way they were microscopic switches, but we were building switches. And today, we're getting into the point where we're using DNA to create microprocessors. Now that's a leap. There's huge leaps there, and I understand. You know, you gradually move up, and I understand how microprocessors are built in the engineering, but then all of a sudden you have these giant leaps. Where did they come from? I mean, if we went into the process of creating a microprocessor and flipping ions and things like that, that's pretty sophisticated stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, today they talk about grasping the energy in the atmosphere. I mean, where did that come from? I mean, that's so far out that is beyond belief.
Well, you've mentioned somebody a couple of times, and we're just beginning today to understand his technology, and that's Tesla.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh boy.
We are just, the problem with Tesla was nobody understood what he was doing. That's number one. Number two is he had to deal with J.P. Morgan to produce some stuff, and Morgan pulled the money from him. Nobody's exactly sure why, and that's probably what sent him off the edge. But a lot of people believe that Marconi created the wireless. Okay, this is just one story. He did not. Tesla did. Tesla had a patent for the wireless 2 years before I think it was 2 years, a year and a half before Marconi came up with it. You know what they did in the United States? They took the patent away from Tesla and gave it to Marconi.
Really?
Yes, because he was from a wealthy family in Europe. They believed it was just the thing to do. Now, if you don't believe this, look it up. They subsequently, after a while, it took a number of years, but people, they petitioned Congress. They gave the patent back to Tesla. So now it's in his name. And of course, Tesla did not invent the Edison did not invent the electrical system that we now use, even though he's credited with doing it. That's what you'll hear in your history class. He invented DC current, not AC. Tesla invented AC. That's what we use today.
So they call the car, they call the car the Tesla. Now,
yes.
Is there really a Tesla connected with that car still?
Oh, well, he bought the rights to all that.
So the family still is.
I don't know if it's the family, but what's his name? I can't think of his name.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk.
Oh.
Yeah. And we're just starting to understand all that technology today. They're even getting to the point now where they're saying he was correct that you could transmit energy right out of the air. Now, what do you think the electric companies would want to do with that? I mean, that would be.
Oh, yeah.
But we're learning more about the electromagnetic fields on Earth. We're learning about the atmosphere. We're learning all this stuff. Scientifically is very possible because we're doing experiments to that effect.
And a lot of the stuff, a lot of the stuff that when we go into outer space today is doing research to find out more to come back to us too, right?
Well,
we're
proving things.
We're proving things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But that's a great point. I was thinking about this as we do the show. You know, I get these things in my mind, and we're talking, and everybody, I am still amazed when people come back and they're so incredulous that you could speak that extraterrestrial life could exist, that aliens could exist. Well, if you're standing on Mars right now, we're aliens coming there.
Right.
And look at what we do. Every day, NASA is sending things out into space. Is it not possible that there's somebody else out there doing exactly the same thing with 220 million galaxies? Sure it is. So we have to kind of step back and say, wait a minute. Just because we've been taught all our lives that this is impossible. We've been taught a lot of things are impossible during our lives. And it's been said many times, everything is impossible until it's not. Okay? And I think I was mentioning to you before we started today, there was actually a book written a number of years ago by a professor at Cambridge University on evolution. And his belief in terms of evolution, that extraterrestrial life does in fact exist. and would look very much like us because of his theories. This is not all that far-fetched, but we have to kind of temper it a little bit. We have to push Hollywood aside a little bit. We just have to take a step back and say, okay, let's start with what we're doing as human beings, going out into space, and then say, could somebody a little more advanced than us do this a little better? And what will we do in 100 years? But you want to talk about the aftermath of
Absolutely.
Roswell.
I mean, you know, when you think about back in Roswell, they were talking about material that would crumple up and just, it would go right back to the shape.
Memory metals.
Memory metals. I mean, and only recently, it was actually the son of the
Jesse Marcel Jr.
Marcel Jr. that brought it to light. And he was working with samples, and he was able to say, yeah, this is what it was doing.
He was given a number of samples. He was given some actual tin foil.
Yep.
He was given some other types of foils. He was given some plastics, and he was given mylar. Okay. Now, mylar didn't exist in 47. And 2 or 3 people actually that looked at this. But when he looked at this, he said the closest, but not exactly, to what he saw was the mylar. They did use a kind of a mylar in the 50s, but it wasn't the same. He said it was mylar. But today we have actual memory metals. We use them for, you can crunch them up. They'll go back to the way they were. Those have been developed. Now, the story here is, and I mentioned Philip Corso, he was the head of the Foreign Technology Desk at the Pentagon for the Army, for the United States government. And his job was to take what they found, this is what he said, take what he found and distribute it to different people for the reverse engineering. He talked about memory metals. He talked about the filaments that became fiber optics.
That's right.
He talked about the crystals. He talked about microprocessors. And he said these went all over the places. He said they went to places like IBM. They went to places like the National Laboratories, even possibly Brookhaven in Long Island. And from there, they were getting stuff back. The Air Force is responsible for microprocessor development. They've done a great deal of that. So what he's saying is exactly what you would do. Now, he made it clear that when he handed this stuff out, or he spread it around, these people never knew where it was coming from or where he got this. The people I spoke with said, in fact, they mentioned something about Brookhaven Labs, and he said, to this day, these scientists don't know. They're just given stuff and said, here, try this. Now, maybe they have their own ideas, but they don't necessarily know where this stuff came from. They're just working on what they find, and they try and reverse engineer that.
I mean, without a doubt, the technology came to us so quick, we had to get help somewhere. There's no question about it.
In less than 100 years, we learned to fly and go to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty quick. If you know anything about the moon missions, you know anything about computers, the computers that they flew with, that they used, were pretty much garbage. All right? It was a 50-50 shot that they could even get there.
You know what's hard to believe is your present iPhone has more Go power in it than they had back then.
Oh,
for
tremendous more.
computing.
I learned, the computers I started with was an IBM called IBM 36030. We all remember these big computers. They'd fill a room.
They fill the room.
They had tape drives, and the boxes were high, and they'd fill a room. And this iPhone that we're carrying, or your smartphones, have 20 times more power than any of those machines possibly had.
Yeah.
And that's what we're dealing with today. We've made a tremendous leap in a little under 100 years. Now, here's the thing that's interesting. Why haven't we gone back to the moon? Okay, and you ask engineers, and they seem to have a problem. I read an article by NASA, some of the NASA engineers are trying to figure out how to get back to the moon. Wait a minute, we did it once. Why don't you look at the stuff we did before and apply some new stuff? Well, they're claiming it's very difficult. They're not exactly sure
How we did it before?
That. Meanwhile, they're making plans to go to Mars, but how would we do that? And you have to wonder how did it happen. Now, there's an interesting story with Werner von Braun, who was the German the architect of the rockets from Germany. He came over here, and he was the big architect on the rockets that got us to the moon. And he was once standing in an office, and he had all these files behind him. And he was being interviewed, and they said to him, and you can find this online, this interview online. And he said, how did we do this? He goes, how did we get all this done? He said, we had help. And he was very matter of fact about it. I said, well, help from who? He goes, from them. And he pointed back to these files, and there was a lot of information in there, and he said people that weren't from here, they helped us out, and
Yes, it's a known fact.
it's interesting.
Yes.
There was I remember seeing a documentary one time, and they were at one of the Air Force bases. I think it was Wright-Patterson, and they had gone in and they were doing this investigation. They were in this office, and you never know if the production people plant these things. But I don't think they're going to let you do that in too many Air Force offices. Yeah. But if you looked at and you didn't really notice it, but these are things I do. I'm looking at they had a desk and they had a cubby, and this person had some books up there. And one of the books was The Day After Roswell. I don't know. Did the production company put it in there or not? I don't know. But it was interesting that The Day After Roswell was sitting up there in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
I think there's it's unfortunate because there's a couple of generations now that didn't experience what it was like when we all crowded around our TV to see that grainy picture and actually landing on the moon. And it seems like a lot of times people don't even know if we ever did that. Yeah. Was that Hollywood? Were we there? You know, would we ever?
I think we did, but I think there's room for doubt because of the things that we were told that we now know weren't true.
So, like if we couldn't make it, would we admit failure?
Right. And how do we know anymore what's true and what isn't?
Fake news.
That's why I like something like this. This is an original story. It can't be changed. It's what it is. What it is. And it really, if you can pick up one of these magazines, you find one. It's August 4th, 1952, Life magazine. Pick it up and read it. You'll find it at a tag sale somewhere. Read the story because there's so much more to that Washington story than what we talked about.
That was legit back then. Life, Look, those two magazines.
Yeah. Look was a big one. But you wanted to mention a couple other people.
Well, now when you think about, reverse engineering, good example. Clarence Johnson, right? Was it Johnson?
His name is Clarence Johnson. They called him Kelly Johnson. He was the father of the Skunk Works.
This man, I mean, his story is just another world in itself. He actually saw a UFO in the day, and in his mind put together a design for one of the most interesting airplanes this country ever developed. Now, Rick, I'm sure you know a lot about that.
Well, we know Kelly Johnson was head of what was called the Lockheed Skunk Works, and their first big project was the U-2 spy plane. People said you couldn't build a plane that would fly so high and fast enough to evade Russian missiles. Yeah. Well, we did, except once or twice. The Russians started to catch up. But he went on to build a thing known as the SR-71 Blackbird, which traveled close to 3,000 miles an hour. Okay, the plane is a beautiful airplane. You've probably seen its long black delta wing airplane. It was built of materials that in the beginning we knew nothing. We didn't know how to work with them. The titanium.
We didn't even know what stealth meant.
And it was kind of a stealth aircraft, and it's interesting. This is where Area 51 comes in, which I don't know if some people know, some people don't know. They took the SR-71 and mock-ups of it, and they brought it to Area 51 and put it on a pole. They put it on this big pole, and then they shot radar. They shot radar beams at it to see how it would reflect, and that's how they started doing the radar reflectivity test at Area 51. That's what they do a lot of. Yep. But the SR-51, when it was on the ground, you put fuel in it, it leaked. They had to put special paint on it because it flew so fast the paint would burn off. But he designed this, and they had to build all new fabrication machines, tools, to build this machine. And he was so far advanced. And the interesting is he had other plans in addition to that going forward. But as he got older, he had a protege by the name of Ben Rich. Ben Rich took over the Lockheed Skunk Works. And Ben Rich is the man who went on camera at 2 presentations at UCLA talking about our technology. And at one point he said, we have the technology, or we know of the technology today. Let me put it this way. We know of the technology today that we could go to Mars, we could go to Venus. I think the issue there was we didn't understand it. And when asked where he got it from, he goes, we got it from extraterrestrials. There were 2 videos that he did. One, he wasn't that explicit. That video still exists. The other one, which you can only find that some of the students who were there, he was very clear about that. And the other thing about Ben Rich is on his deathbed, he restated all of this. He goes, I want to make this clear before we go. We had help. Okay, he was on his deathbed. Now in a court of law, that counts. Was it true? Was it not true? What I think we're starting to see as we go forward, and we're watching our own development and the technology that we're creating, we're starting to look at this stuff and look backwards and say, we're doing that Monday morning quarterbacking. Or is it Tuesday morning now because we have Monday Night Football? And we're saying, wait a minute, we're starting to do this very stuff. Now, did we get help? Did we get ideas from this? Was this the inspiration for doing some of the things we do? I don't know.
Is it a coincidence that it's called the SR-51?
SR-71.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, SR-71. Okay,
No,
okay.
it's not the SR-51.
Okay.
It's just, there's just interesting things that you're seeing that you look and are they coincidence? They could be, but there's starting to be an awful lot of them. And again, when I start talking to people who were there and know some of this stuff, and they tell me some of their secrets, which we wrote down, and I go back and I study the other stuff. And like I said, I always go back and see if I can find some correlation to science somewhere. Some type of correlation. Now, we were talking about the day after Roswell and the different technology. Well, we talked a little bit about Brookhaven National Laboratory in Long Island. They have a project currently to create DNA-based nanotechnology.
What?
So that would be living nanotechnology. Now, we use nanotechnology for a lot of things. We use it for circuits. We use it for things.
Yeah.
You can inject nanotechnology into the body for certain medical procedures.
Okay.
Okay? But we're now talking about DNA-based nanotechnology. That's living matter. We're talking about engineered living materials project. That's living matter. Now, according to these men, and something I don't think we mentioned about Roswell, I'm not sure if it was, they were talking always about Roswell, but they were talking about extraterrestrial craft. And what they said, what these military people said is that extraterrestrial spacecraft are alive by our standards. They're alive by our standards, okay? They're a living thing that can be communicated with, that these people can communicate back and forth with. So the flight characters, all that is like stepping into a shoe and going. And we're saying, that's impossible. Well, no, because we're creating the engineered living materials project. I know part of that is to create living skins for aircraft that can repair itself. I know that I worked on a project where we could talk to our airplanes. Now, a rudimentary version of that, voice recognition, but where pilots could talk to their aircraft. We are on that path today.
Oh, absolutely.
When will we get there?
Absolutely.
50 years? 100 years? We're going there. So all the stuff we heard before, yeah. I mean, I think about it, I say, wow, that's kind of far out. And I hesitate when I talk to people. I say, when I talk about this, my first thing I say is, listen, I'm not crazy. I'm just telling you what I was told and what I've been able to research. But this is coming.
Yes,
and
sir.
It's going to be there.
Well, as usual, Rick, we are having fun and time is flying, and we're going to have to break this off today, but I'm going to tell you, this subject about reverse engineering is just over the top, and we have more things we're going to cover probably on the next episode, and I want to thank everybody for viewing in today, and don't forget, now we have a email address, theviewshow@aol.com, and we are very interested to see what you have to say, and we're going to give you some answers back, because eventually our goal is to have a very live show where people could actually call in and interject with us on these different subjects. So as usual, find yourself a comfortable chair and get ready next time, because we are going to have a real good session next time, right, Rick? We're going to get into some more deeper things that went on in the day, and we're going to start talking about present day activities, which, believe me, there's plenty of them.
There's stuff going on.
And we may even have another friend for our buddy Steve here. Yeah.
Now, we talk about present day. You know, we can talk about Connecticut, and I can bring on Mike Panicello, and he can.
Yeah,
Oh, cool.
absolutely.
He's ready to go.
Very good. Don't forget, email us, please, at theviewshow@aol.com. Thank you. We want to thank Nutmeg TV for all their help and support for making this show possible, and our crew with cameraman Bill Majak and, of course, the host of the show. This program is brought to you in part by SalCal Real Estate Connections.